And thank you for the invitation to speak about the book.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to move just a little so that I can see you and I can see them as well?
Yeah.
So we have, as you see here, some slides that are possibly running of the illustrations that come from the book. The People of the Indus and the Birth of Civilization in South Asia. This is Nikhil Gulati's graphic novel about Mohenjo-daro, about the Indus, about many of these sites. And so it's a particular pleasure for me as someone who works at Mohenjo-daro, who's been trained in Indus studies for the last 2.5 decades, to be able to sit with someone who's done such an excellent job representing so much of the data that we have from the Indus, right? And to create narrative around it and to make it into storytelling, to make history alive is a particular kind of magic. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation. And I wanted to kind of start, before we even get to the book, can we start with some of your own personal journey? How did you even get to the graphic novel, the graphic form?
Yeah, sure. Do you guys think we need the mic? Or you can hear us clearly? It's fine? Okay. So firstly, thanks IAAC for inviting me here, and thank you Uzma Z for coming. I'm very excited to be here. This is my first book. I'm not a renowned author yet, but thank you for that very generous introduction. So a little bit about my journey. I started off just like a very good, responsible Indian kid as a computer engineer.
That sounds right.
Yeah. And it's been a little bit of a windy, path to get to comic books. Where should I start? Should I start? Okay, I'll start really in the beginning, and then I'll give a quick journey of like what journey I've taken to get here. So I grew up in Delhi. I was studying in Delhi in school till I was 15. And then my parents moved to the US. My parents are here also. They moved to the US and we moved here. And I did a couple of years of high school here, after which I decided to study computer science. I went to University of Maryland to study computer science. I finished that, and at that point, I just couldn't think of getting a job. For some reason, I never liked the idea of jobs. So I was like, I'll just stay in college a little bit longer. So I decided to do a master's also in computer science. And then I was working for a couple of years as a software designer and engineer, at which point I decided I'm going to go back to India because I had this feeling that I wanted to do something in the creative fields. Like I had enjoyed computer science, but I wasn't super into it. And I thought I would like to try something in the creative fields. I wasn't sure at all what. But I knew that it has to be in India because I felt the energy in India was really vibrant and great, and the economy was booming, and there was a lot of scope for doing new things. So I thought, why not go back?
Let's try it, yeah.
So I went back to India. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. So for a year, I just volunteered. I traveled around. I lived in a tiny village in Rajasthan for 6 months. And I was hoping that I'll have some idea at the end of this what to do. But after a year of doing this, I still had no clue.
Right.
So I continued being a good Indian kid and went and did an MBA.
Oh, very good. It's like check.
Yeah, like I've done everything. Now nobody can tell me, you should have done this or that.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, fine, I'll just do an MBA. And I was hoping, I'm looking for my water. Yeah, here. I was hoping that, I'll find something interesting to do.
Yeah.
I wasn't really sure what. But two very interesting things happened during my MBA. One was that I turned 30. And I had always thought that by the time I'm 30, everything will be figured out. I will know exactly what I'm doing in my life, and I will already be settled. But I was 30 and I had no clue. And the second thing that happened was that I did an internship with a very prestigious, highly coveted company that paid a lot of money, but I hated the work. It was terrible. And that's when I was like, I've just been waiting for some nice thing to come to me where I will feel engaged, where, I'll feel inspired, but it just wasn't happening.
Right.
So I decided, okay, I have to take matters into my own hands and I have to decide for myself what I want to do.
Right.
And that's when I decided to go back to kind of my, my childhood interests were things that I did for myself where nobody was telling me, hey, do this, do that.
Right.
And that's how I got to comics.
But were you drawing this whole time, like just on the side, like when you'd be in like MBA classes, you were like doodling on the side?
I was definitely doodling, yes.
Yeah, and drawing people's like
but
as
I
they're
wasn't
speaking and yeah.
Yeah, I was drawing since I was a kid, but not very seriously. I hadn't really trained in it, just for fun. I used to take it up every once in a while, struggle with it for 2-3 weeks, then just stop. Then come back to it after a year, you know. If I see some nice illustration or painting or something, I would get inspired. And then I would want to start drawing again, but I just it wouldn't get anywhere, so I would give up.
Right.
And even during my MBA, after I decided to kind of start in comics, I had no idea that I'll be drawing comics.
Right.
I had actually, like my first idea was that I'm going to start a library of comics. Like it's going to be a mobile library. It's just going to be a bus which will have, let's say, 500 graphic novels or something, and it'll go around the city. It'll stop in like a dozen places, and it'll make a circuit after a week and come back, and I'll lend out books, and it'll be a for-profit thing, but it'll be kind of like a library. So that's where I got started. I started collecting graphic novels, and very soon I realized they were only American or Japanese or some European graphic novels. And there were only a very few handful of Indian graphic novels or South Asian graphic novels. So I was like, okay, maybe that's not the problem I need to solve. Maybe I need to create comics. So I decided, okay, I'm going to become a publisher. I'm going to get writers and I'm going to get artists. I'm going to put them together and I'll tell them the ideas, and then they will create something and I'll sell it.
Right.
And then I thought, well, they're going to do the ideas they want to do. You know, I hate it when people tell me, hey, can you do this for me? I like to work on my own ideas. So of course, they're going to like to work on their own ideas. So I decided I'm just going to write the scripts and I'll hire artists to draw it.
Yeah.
And then I wrote a script. After my MBA, I did take up a job, and in my job, during the meetings, this is all I did. I wrote script because the meetings were completely useless. It didn't matter that I wasn't paying attention. Right. So I finished a script for a whole graphic novel during my meetings in 8 months.
Right.
And then I went looking for artists, but the artists were very expensive.
Oh.
So at this time I was drawing, but I was not confident at all that I can draw a comic book.
Right.
But I got lucky that I had a very, very good mentor that I found at this point. He's a professor at IAAC in Ahmedabad, and he's himself a very successful entrepreneur, but he gives lectures and he encourages people to take up, just start their own things and not take up jobs, not become, just a cog in the wheel. So he was very inspiring. And I spoke to him one day and he told me, he was like, do you like drawing? I was telling him about this problem that I've written the script, but there's the artists are very expensive and I don't have the money to pay them. So he was like, do you like drawing? I said, yeah, but I'm not good enough to draw myself. So he was like, just don't think about that. You have to draw, just draw. And then he asked me, like, okay, just think in an ideal world scenario, what would you be doing? Right. Forget about your limitations, but in an ideal world, what would you be doing? And the answer was very, very clear that in an ideal world, I will be writing my comics, I will be drawing my comics. It was very clear to me. So I just didn't have that faith in myself. So he was like, forget about everything, just do it.
Just do it, yeah.
And then he said that if you finish a comic book, I'll give you money to print 1,000 copies.
You got your first investor.
So I was like, of course, I'll do it. That was a comic book I wrote on the Golconda Fort.
Well, so this is what I wanted to ask you, because it's not just any comic or any narrative. There's a very particular interest in history and in archaeology that you have, right? That is informing these drawings. Can you talk a little bit about that, like add that into this as well?
Yeah. So I used to hate history as a subject, just absolutely hate it. Let me start there. It's just dates and memorizing, like what is happening. There's no stories. I just want to remind you I'm an archaeologist.
Yeah, I'm just reminding you that I'm sitting right here.
I mean, I did write 2 books on history.
I'm joking. I'm teasing you. Yeah.
So I used to just absolutely not feel inspired. But one thing that I used to love as a kid was just going to forts. I remember just roaming around in forts and I would be mesmerized. I would just be imagining like, okay, I just want to know what happened here. If I'm standing in a hallway or a room or even amongst the ruins, like I just want to picture people going about their business back in time when the fort was functional or whatever. And length graphic novel. The Golconda book was just 60 pages. So I decided, okay, I'll take up Indus Valley. It's so fascinating, but nobody knows about it.
Right.
Like in popular imagination,
Right.
you guys of course know a lot about it. Like a lot
Right.
has been done,
Yeah.
but outside in the public imagination, this is just very little known. And whatever is known is also, I feel, very outdated. It's
Right.
outdated by decades.
Yeah.
So I thought this would be a great topic. And why do we know so much about Egypt and so much about Mesopotamia, but know absolutely nothing about the Indus Valley?
Yeah.
If it's supposed to be a contemporary and supposed to be one of the great ancient civilizations. So I took it up and I just decided I'm going to do the research, I'm going to write it, I'm going to draw it.
Yeah.
And I moved to a small village in the mountains just so I can cut down my expenses altogether so that I can just focus on the book.
Yeah.
I was planning to research for 3 months, write the script another 3 months, and do the drawings in 6 months. So I was like, I have a plan. In a year, this book will be done. It will be out. That was almost 6 years back, and the book came out last month. So it was a bit of a journey.
Yeah.
But the first 3 or 4 years, I hadn't been in touch with anybody. I was just kind of isolated, working on this book and doing a lot of research. Kind of going back and forth in the research and the writing, because as I was writing the script, new questions would arise.
Yeah.
The first question that got me hooked was, why didn't these people build pyramids? That was my main question.
That's also the title of one of the chapters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pyramids?
Pyramids.
Because the pyramids are so impressive and spectacular. Like, why are these people not building pyramids? Why were they not building pyramids? Is it because they didn't have the skills? Is it because they were like, the society was too simple or whatever? Which turned out later to not be the case at all. At all. And that was the question that got me hooked. But while I was writing the script, new questions were coming up. So I would keep going back and forth and do more research. And then I discovered Dr. Kanoya's work while doing the research, and I found it to be very inspiring. And I found that he's one of the few people who have excavated one site intensively for decades. Like for more than 35 years, he's excavated Harappa. Whereas a lot of other archaeologists, they've excavated for a little bit, then they moved on, or they moved on to a different time period or something. So I had used a lot of his work, and then around like 4 years after starting, once I had the whole manuscript done, the drawings, everything complete, I had put end on the last page. Then I just I made a PDF and I mailed it to a lot of people, and I sent it to Dr. Kanoya just saying, hey Dr. Kanoya, thanks for inspiring me, and I used a lot of your work in my book, and here's what I've created. I would love to know what you think. I was not expecting to hear back from him at all, but fortunately he wrote back and he was like, yeah, this looks great. I've read a few pages. It looks really good. The only problem is it has a lot of misinterpretations of the academic literature. And I was like, oh. And I was hoping he'll say, yeah, this is the best thing I've ever read. Of course, yeah, go for it. It's correct. Everything you have said is perfect. But obviously, there were gaps. And it didn't surprise me. Like after I had digested this thing for a few hours, then I was like, okay, it's not so surprising that there are gaps in this. Of course, I'm not an expert. I'm not an archaeologist myself. But I was also like it was nice that he said that he really liked the narrative, and he liked the way the things were presented, and he basically said most of it is fine, it's just some issues are there. So I asked him, do you know anybody who can help me fix those errors? I was hoping he'll suggest some PhD student or something like that. At which point he was like, I can help you, but it'll take some time, and I don't want any money or anything, but if I'm going to spend a considerable time on it, I would love to be a co-author. I was like, yes, of course. I would love to have your name on this book. And so then we collaborated for another 5 or 6 months where we literally went over the whole book, line by line, word by word, picture by picture. Like there's tiny things that he has helped me correct. So being an artist himself, it was very helpful that he had visualized the clothes, the jewelry, the hairstyles, and even the architecture and the houses. So that was very helpful, and having him on board really helped. Like the minor things, like for example, I had drawn a house with a front yard, and there was a wall around the front yard. And he said that there's no evidence of walls. So he said if you want to create an enclosure kind of thing, just make it like a bamboo fence or something.
Yeah.
So I made those kinds of corrections.
You also have some images of him, like
Yeah.
was that before he was part of it, or was
It was already there.
It was already there.
I had made a caricature of him, and he was like, he didn't like his caricature.
He's like, I don't.
He was like, can you make another one? So then I corrected those.
So let's talk a little bit about the narrative, because it sounds like you had already developed the narrative of the story prior to sending it to Mark.
Yeah.
And so can you talk about how you yourself took all this like evidence and thought of the story, right? Because the story is coming from history is a story, right?
Yeah.
So like what is this telling you that allowed you to create because your narrative is also intergenerational.
Yeah.
Right? So what are you thinking about? How did you do that? What was your process? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. My process was basically, it's like running a marathon when you haven't trained for it. You just know that you have to run in that direction, and you just start, and you haven't trained for it, and after a while you're just exhausted.
Yeah.
And you have no energy. It was more of like just figuring it out while I'm doing it. But I think the way I started was really good, which was basically, after I had done a lot of research, I knew all the things that I want in the book.
Right.
Like the things that really inspired me, that really interested me. Like for example, the writing.
Right.
The writing is so mysterious, and it's almost like you see the seals and it has these short inscriptions, and you know that there's either names or titles or their gods or something is in there and it's staring you in the face. You just don't know it.
Yeah.
And that mystery kind of really intrigued me. So there were a lot of things like that that I really wanted in the book.
Yeah.
So I basically had like a bunch of these things, and I knew that I need a thread that's going to connect them so that I can talk about these. So I didn't really know what the narrative is going to be like. And that slowly I discovered. And for those of you who don't know, every chapter starts with like a little bit of a fictional story of a family back in time. And there's 5 chapters. And it starts off with a family that is packing up in a village back in time, 5,000 years back. They're packing up their stuff, they're loading everything into a bullock cart, and they set off for the city. And every chapter starts off with a little bit of this kind of fictionalized characters and them going about their stuff, but it moves over time. And every chapter has a family, but they're connected over generations. I haven't made this explicit, but I don't know if you made that connection.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's intergenerational.
Yeah,
but I knew that because I know the seals.
Yeah.
So what was really wonderful is that with each one, as you go through the generations, the material culture that the characters are all using, what they're wearing, their hairstyles, the pots, he's changed it based on archaeological evidence.
Yeah.
Right? So when I saw it, I was like, oh, this must be the grandchild. And then I realized that he hadn't made it explicit.
Yeah.
But I knew it because I know the language, the semiotics of the seals and stuff. Yeah.
So
which is why I was asking.
So that narrative kind of came about midway through. I hadn't planned it to be that way. I had planned it to be just a non-fiction history where the narrator kind of takes you around the sites, and he shows you the sites and then talks about what we know, and he also talks about how we know about the past, and then I recreate the cities and the settings and the people back in time. Then at some point I realized, no, I need a much more human connection, and I want to see, this is what I would have wanted to see. So I started composing like these little bits where it'll be a fictionalized thing. And then later on I kind of realized that, why don't I string them together as if it's a family, the same family over several generations. And the last chapter, the family actually
has to leave again.
Leaves the city because the city's decline. And they basically, they just pack up again and leave for the villages. And
it's interesting because it echoes so many of the same conversations that those initial families were having when they were first moving to the city.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really great way to think through history. Like, sometimes we say just in passing that history repeats itself.
Yeah.
But, in fact, people move around. Like the mobility of families and people is something we've seen through millennia. And why we make these decisions are different, but the decisions are made, and I think it's such an interesting way. So you move between this, you can see the narrator right here. So you move between this, who's not quite the protagonist, but occupies a space of storytelling and walking you through all the data. And then you also have this family that you are following them, right? And who keep coming in and out, and they show the daily lives, the everydayness of what it might mean to live there. And I think that's quite remarkable and quite beautiful in that way.
And that's what inspires me about history, because I mean, basically, history to me is about change.
Right.
It's about change. The fact that, you know, how we dress, what we eat, how we live, that changes. But not only that, but it's also how we think. Like the kinds of things we value, those things change. But at the same time, there's some very basic human things that stay exactly the same.
Yeah.
Family, friendships, things that, you know, like what we want to achieve and stuff like that. Those kinds of feelings, underlying feelings are pretty much the same.
Yeah.
And I think being able to do that and show an actual family over time, I think kind of helped me also connect to the people who would have been alive back then.
Yeah.
And saying that, yeah, these are basically people just like you and me.
Right.
They're no different.
Right.
It's just that their circumstances are different, the way they do things are a little bit different. So yeah, that helps us connect.
That helps us connect,
Yeah.
and it makes it so that those same students who were saying we're not so sure about history
Yeah.
are like, well, I don't know about history, but this is great, you know, like, you know, because it allows people to visualize something, and I think data visualization is really quite significant in today's world, right? I think the visual field is very significant in a way that it wasn't in the same way like maybe 3 generations ago.
Yeah.
I mean, the visual field has always been important, but I think the ways in which people learn has changed.
Yeah.
Actually. You know?
I mean, as a medium, I feel comics have been around for literally thousands of years.
Yeah.
I mean, even the cave paintings in France, in the Chauvet caves or whatever, I think they're basically comics.
Right.
Because you see that there are animals in a series. It's not just one animal, it's actually a head.
It's almost like an animation.
It's almost a motion thing, you know, it's something that somebody will walk up to with a torch or something and just you would show one by one and maybe tell the stories while they're showing those images. Same with something like those ancient scrolls, you know. There's this tradition in Hyderabad, near Hyderabad in India, Telangana, where they have these scroll paintings.
Yeah.
And basically it's just a long scroll and they keep unscrolling it. And it has drawings and the narrator just stands next to it and points to things and tells the story. And there's also somebody playing the drums and they're singing. It's basically a comic. So the medium, that visual medium has been, I think, pretty universal, but I think in the last maybe 100 years or something, we started focusing a little bit more on the written word, and that became that's why like we started calling these graphic novels, because comics were like, oh, these are for kids, these are for superhero things, they're not serious stuff. So then the comics artists were like, no, we have to call it something serious.
with the novel.
So we'll call it a graphic novel.
Well, and it is serious. I mean, this is the thing. It's rigorous research. It's really important. It's a lot of skillful work too, right? This is not just like a drawing. This is like a graphic novel. I think does allow it for. So tell me, like, so 6 years is quite some time to invest. So do you feel like there's something specific that you got out of this that you're kind of holding with you, taking with you? As you move into your next projects, and maybe we can talk a bit about like what that is, and then what are you thinking about doing next?
One thing I got out of it is that, okay, now I can run a marathon.
Okay, well, that's good.
Okay, I can do this. Actually, the most important thing that happened in the middle of the book had nothing to do with this book. I found that, like, I had imagined that the most challenging thing will be either the research or writing the script or drawing or whatever. Because even the skills that go into this, even just deciding what panel comes after what, that itself is a skill. And then of course the drawing itself, being able to draw humans, showing them in a setting and all that is a skill. And I thought those would be the biggest challenges, but those apparently were not the biggest challenges. The biggest challenge was this voice in my head that kept telling me that you're not good enough. You don't know what you're doing. Who's going to read this? You've done something stupid. Why did you leave that job that was paying so well, and now you have absolutely no money, and nobody's going to hire you. You've already been doing this for 3 years. You're outdated now in the market. And what's going to happen? So that voice that kept on going in my head was very difficult, because at some points it would be paralyzing, where you're not able to get up in the morning and start working because there's so much self-doubt. And there came a time when I had stopped enjoying the daily work. And then I was like, this is not why I got into this. I got into it because I enjoy these things. So dealing with that was, I think, one of the biggest challenges. And it took me some time, but I managed to not quieten those voices, but I know how to deal with them. They're there, but it's like, it's okay. I hear where you're coming from. I know that you want me to do better work. That's why you're there, but
Yeah.
you're fine. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
And this belief that I'm going to do this anyway. This
Yeah.
is something I need to do. This is something that I would love to see in the world. Like if somebody had already created this book, I would have been very happy. I would have just bought it. I wouldn't have had to work on it, but it wasn't there, so I worked on it.
Yeah.
And I think that belief that came that, okay, this is the work that I enjoy, and this is the work that fulfills me,
Yeah.
and I'm going to do it, and I can do it.
I think that's incredibly
that's one of the
powerful,
biggest
yeah?
takeaways.
That's so powerful because it's not something anyone can teach you in a classroom.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not a skill set that's something you have to actually develop through practice.
Yeah.
So that's quite
And it's something you
remarkable.
have to go through. Like
Yeah.
you have to spend that time where you deal with that self-doubt. Otherwise, you can listen to as many inspiring lectures or
That's
whatever as
right.
you want, but
Yeah.
it won't help until you actually are in it and you are thinking that you made a huge mistake and you're like, what is going on? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
Until you sit with that feeling, you don't get to the
You
other
can't
side.
get to the other side, yeah.
Yeah.
And so what is the other side? Where are we going next? Tell us what you're looking forward to.
So I want to do a little more history, but I want to do it in a slightly different way now.
Achha.
I want to attack it from a different angle.
Okay.
I want to write histories without dates
Oh.
and without any overarching historical theories and concepts.
Yeah.
Because I feel like when people are living their lives, they're part of history, but they don't think of it like that. It's not like people in the Bronze Age were thinking, oh yeah, we're in the Bronze Age. And something else is going to happen now, or when you're in the Iron Age. You're not thinking like that. But whereas we do, we look back and we see, oh yeah, this was the European colonial period in subcontinental history or whatever, and this was the Persian period or whatever.
Yeah.
But when you're in it, you're not thinking like that. So I want to write histories that do kind of something similar, where they go over generations, but they are from a very human perspective. Like I have the idea for one book where it's just very, very simple. It's just every double page of the book is a snapshot of one neighborhood, and it will start off with a sapling, somebody planting a sapling, and then every time you flip the page, you just move to the next generation. It's 25 years later, and that's the only static thing, where every flip has to be 25 years later, and it's going to there'll be no dates. You won't know where in time you are,
Right.
but you can kind of
Yeah.
get a sense from, like you said, from what you're seeing, the architecture or the things people are wearing, and you just keep moving forward.
Just flipping. But the tree then becomes your
the tree,
relative.
yeah, of course, grows.
Yeah.
The tree is kind of a constant.
Yeah.
And
That's your time.
Yeah.
That's your timekeeper.
Yeah.
That's kind of beautiful.
So those kinds of things I want to.
Is there any
do
specific
later.
geographic world area you're thinking of, or is it going to
Oh, it has
be like?
to be the subcontinent.
It has to
yeah,
be.
it has to
It
be.
has to be. Yeah.
Because there's so
There's
few.
so much.
There's so much going on. There's so much history.
Yeah.
And there's so much that's just untouched. There's so many interesting periods that nobody has even gone and looked at.
Yeah.
So it has to be that.
Yeah.
But I'm also moving into something slightly different, even in terms of the medium. I'm experimenting. So this one is a print book, and the idea that I just discussed about this page flip and all is also meant to be a print book. But I'm also starting to move into digital comics, just because just like history, one of my other main interests was music, and I want to write comics either about musicians or with music.
Yeah.
It has to be a part of it, and they can't be on paper. There has to be.
It has to be.
There has to be an
for sure.
oral element to it. So I'm starting to make some comics which will be on the screen, and I want to use basically the power of the device itself.
Right.
So and now you can start making things a little bit interactive. Did this
Not
pause?
sure why it paused. Yeah. You might want to reload it again.
No, I think it's fine. Yeah.
It's fine? Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's where I'm going next.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That's very exciting. I think moving into even when we think about sound and the ancient world or the historic world, that's something that is only now is now coming into understanding. Like a lot of more academics are writing about sound archaeology and everything else, But also just thinking about what did it sound like?
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
what did it sound like to be there? What was Mohenjo-daro like at night? What was like, because we always also imagine, at least when I used to be taught history, I used to always think of history happening during the day.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was always during the day. Like unless it was like a nighttime raid, it was always during the day. And so like what's happening at night? Like how are people walking through the streets? How can they see what's happening,
Yeah.
And then what are they hearing? What are they listening to? And what sorts of birds were there? And was there traffic? Were people screaming? Was there someone selling something on the side of the street? Were people arguing in the neighborhood?
Exactly.
Like, what's happening? That kind of bringing that to life, I think, is kind of incredible. Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you again. I'm looking at the time, and I want to make sure we have a few minutes for question and answer. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So do we have any questions? Oh, we do. Okay. Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, so Nikhil, thank you very much for a beautiful story about how you arrived at this. Growing up, I read a lot of the Amar Chitra Katha. I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, even I've grown up on Amar Chitra Katha.
So I was just thinking, have you thought about maybe recrafting those stories which already exist and which are well built in pictorial graphical comics into something with music and so on, because that would probably be aligned with your
I haven't thought of recreating old Amar Chitra Kathas, but new things, yes, and old stories, yes. Like, for example, the Vikram Betal stories, I find them absolutely fascinating. Even though it has been done many times. Yeah, stories within stories. So something in that same vein, but new, like something new. Yeah.
And one little question for you as well.
Oh, sure.
As somebody who's familiar with the Indus Valley civilization, a conundrum that's been around for a long time is what eventually led to the decline of the...
Right.
Was it true? Was it floods or was it something else?
Well, the city is actually very well, like if you think about Mohenjo-daro and any of these cities, the reason the drainage is so important is because the water gets drained out. All of these major cities are very close to waterways, and there's often flooding. So even now, the floods that just happened in Pakistan, the city of Mohenjo-daro is still standing. The water was they did a lot of conservation work. They came in, they helped the water out. But so much of the rest of the country is still underwater, whereas this city from 6,000 years ago is still. I'm going to be going there in like 2 or 3 weeks. So the thing is, what happened in the 3rd millennium BC and into the time when you see people moving, the way archaeologists look at movement of people is through their settlement pattern. So we realize that at a certain time people stop living as much. Like when we talk about decline, it just means that people are moving away from the city itself at that time, but not everyone has left, right? There's still people who are there. There's still other things. Like so, when you look at the image, the canonical sort of image of Mohenjo-daro is often the one with the stupa, right? That suggests that people are still there, right? Like why would you build a stupa? No one's there. So it's just that it's not as large a city and as prominent a city anymore because people are moving around. So decline, I think, of cities happens for different reasons. In our archaeologically, we see climate as an issue. We see there's some idea that there might be a different kind of social ideology, right? Different kinds of ways of control, like power and control, and just different people who are interacting. I don't know if anyone's seen the movie Mohenjo-daro with Hrithik Roshan. If you haven't, the last scene is quite epic. And in that last scene, it's a big flood. And the idea is that everyone is taken out, because that's in popular consciousness, that we grew up in India, right? Like, we grew up with this idea that there is a flood that comes and then everyone moves to the Gangetic Plain, right? But that's not what we see archaeologically, right? Floods did come. Many floods came.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the reason, right? But climate change was.
The theory that I have discussed in this is about the river
shifting,
drying up, and therefore settlement patterns changing. That's the one that I found really compelling, and that's the one that Dr. Kenoyer also. Yeah, and
supports. We have evidence of settlement patterns along this dried riverbed, right?
So apparently it wasn't just based on one river, the Indus. There was another river. And there's a whole bit, the Ghagar Hakra, which some scholars identify as the Saraswati because it also dried up. But we can see clearly archaeologically that the river dries up because the settlements then move more and more upstream over time, and then the settlement patterns shift. So that's the theory that I have discussed in this at some length.
Professor B.B. Lal also did, just because we're talking about Saraswati, did a survey in India also for the Saraswati River, where they thought the Saraswati River was, and we didn't find any settlement patterns there. Right, so I think people are looking for where are these dried river beds, and this often happens with this. Whether we read Herodotus and the histories, or we read the Bible, any of these sort of stories, like you have you have text that tells you a story, and you're like, well, where will I find it?
Where in archaeology?
You know,
yeah.
but you have to be very careful going back and forth, because
Yeah.
of course it is still a story that's
Yeah.
written by someone.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, or some.
And the literary evidence versus the archaeological, they don't seem to match up anywhere.
Yeah.
There's only some tantalizing
places,
clues.
some things.
Which is why this is so interesting to me, because it's just
It's not
one
as
of
clear.
the it's not as clear.
Yeah.
There's no clear answers. It's one of the most mysterious things.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you have a question, and then I think you have a question. Go ahead.
So I echo what Balaji said. When Sidhu called me up and said, hey, this is a really intriguing book, nothing like it, I have to say after viewing it, he is completely right, and that IAAC,
Thank you.
curators go out of the way. We're hunters.
Yeah.
We look for books that are topical, timeless.
Yeah.
But a couple of observations that I want your reactions to. India's greatest historian, the one who wrote The Long Art of History, Rajtarangani, in 1115, starts off by making an assertion that modern day historians completely walked away from and brought back. And his starting line is history is first and foremost an art form. Second thing, what I really liked about you and your creativity, which Bharji far exceeds our Chitraka.
That's very generous praise.
I'll tell you why, and I want to understand your creative process now. Was some of this conscious or unconscious? And I'm going to ask you a question. Where this differs from the Amarachitra Katha is that there is time travel. You are actually going on a journey. You are taking me on a journey. There's time travel here.
Yeah.
There's no time travel on Amarachitra Katha. That's flat space.
Yeah.
Dimensional people doing this stuff. It's a camera, Amarachitra Katha.
Yeah.
This is a video because I'm traveling.
That's right. You're right. No. You're right.
So I'm curious, what's some of this, were you debating in your mind, saying I'll do this, and then you said, no, I'll make it a first person story, which permits time travel, or was it just unconscious because the goddess blessed you, this is your story.
Yeah, this is how you're going to do it.
So I want to understand the creative process,
Yeah.
because this is so unique.
Oh, thanks.
It will bring back our culture, but it will create a new genre.
Oh, thanks.
New genre.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Long question.
That's very interesting that you mentioned about the Rajtarangini, how it starts off with that line that history is an art. I had no idea. This is the first time I heard this. But yeah, my book starts with a quote to the same effect. That's pretty cool. In terms of the narrative, I don't really know. I guess it was a goddess that blessed me because I always, just naturally, this idea of having a narrator seemed more natural to me. And this idea of connecting the present to the past, this whole thing about time travel, like that's literally what I wanted to do. I wanted to personally be able to time travel. Like when I was talking about forts, that was what I wanted. Just for like half a second, just shift me back in time and then bring me back. That's all I need. And that's kind of what I wanted to create. And this idea of a narrator is that same thing where the narrator is kind of giving you a tour, taking you, like just holding your hand almost and guiding you around, because that's what I would have liked to see.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, it just kind of came naturally to me.
I think also archaeology allows you to do that. I often tell my students that essentially what we are doing is traveling time, right? Because through the artifacts, you're actually going through time. So at the same time, so it might be 2022 now, but when I'm excavating, I'm in the Bronze Age, and then someone says to me something else about like something that's going to happen, like with some Islamic date or with a different kind of date, like you move between time quite seamlessly when you're within the archaeological world. But I think you're absolutely right about the 2D-ness of Amar, because that's what I was going to say. So the reason I didn't bring Amarachitra Katha was because there's a different kind of like capturing of time and space and a different kind of immersion that you have in those comics than you have in this. This really...
I used to always want somebody to do this for me,
right.
that show me how it is now and then show me how it used to be, the same scene.
Yeah.
So I used to keep picturing this all the time. And I think that was pretty much my only goal when I started comics. My goal was that you don't see so much here in these slides. These, by the way, are from the Indus book. They're just random slides. You don't have to read them.
I'll pass mine around.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's take a look.
But yeah, that was pretty much my goal. Show the ruins, the next page show a recreation of the ruins.
Yeah.
So that's how I started. And when this professor told me that he'll give me money to print 1,000 copies, I was living in Hyderabad at the time, and I was just a short 10-minute walk from the Golconda Fort. So I picked that as my topic, and I was like, "This is it. I'm going to write on this." Yeah.
You know what's amazing is that you're not the only one who hates history in that way, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of you, there are many of us who first start in history classes, and we're like, why do I care what date this war happened? You know, and to be able to think through how to make that actually alive, to make it something that someone who that can't quite see, because we all learn in different ways, right? So when you're standing at the fort or you're standing at Mohenjo-daro, to see those stories come alive, or to have a narrative to fit into that space, I think using graphic novel as a vehicle is incredibly smart, right? So what's interesting though, there's also, if you think through, so that was the Golconda Fort, right? Can we talk a bit about the process of this particular book, right? That when you started drawing it and you started writing it, did you do the script yourself, or because I know that you have this is collaborated with Jonathan Mark Knoyer. And Mark Knoyer, for those of you who don't know, has been working on the Indus for over 40-50 years, since the 80s, and is a very well-respected archaeologist of the Indus, world-known authority. I mean, he's one of my mentors. He's and so to be able to have him and you do this together, I think that's particularly special. So could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So before we were talking about using comics as a medium for history, a little bit more on that. I always also used to feel like whenever I read history and people were talking about, oh yeah, this emperor, he minted these coins and they're punch marked or whatever, and they have this motif or that thing. I used to always just be like, just show me the coins. And people are talking about Takshila or something. I just want to see, at least show me the ruins. And if possible, also show me what it was like. And second, the other thing we can do with history is I can put a human being there, and you kind of get at a human scale, you kind of get to see either the ruins, or if I'm showing a seal or something, I don't have to say that it's an inch tall or something. I can just show the person, oops, this is supposed to be looping. I can just show you how big it is by showing you the narrator holding the seal, So that kind of thing I feel, so how do I do this? There. Is there a way to loop this?
I'll keep an eye on it when it starts.
It's fine,
getting close
I'll just
to the wall.
let it loop. So
the scale became really important.
Yeah, that becomes important and interesting. And when you're describing what it would have been like to be in Mohenjo-daro, I'm just like, can you show me from the rooftop? Just stand on a rooftop and show me what Mohenjo-daro was like, So that kind of thing really excited me. And the way I got to the Indus Valley itself was a bit of a journey, because when I was living in Ahmedabad, and there's a site called Lothal. For those of you who don't know, Lothal is one of the well-known sites of the Indus Valley in Gujarat. So I was living very close to it, had no idea about it. I had never heard of Lothal. I had heard of Indus Valley because you study about it in school and you're told that, oh yeah, they had drains or something. That's literally the extent of my knowledge. That was the extent of my knowledge, that they had drains. I don't know why that's supposed to be exciting, but...
It is quite exciting, actually.
Now, I discovered later.
The infrastructure is remarkable, I just have to say.
But as somebody who doesn't know anything about it, somebody comes up to you and this is one of the great ancient civilizations, same time as the pyramids, and they had drains. And this is literally what happened. I went to Lothal. I didn't know anything about it. My friends were going. I was like, fine, I'll come along. And I knew about the Indus Valley, that it's same time as pyramids. So for some reason, I went almost expecting something spectacular like with the pyramids.
That's right,
And when I went there, I saw drains.
You saw drains?
Basically, there's one drain and 5 houses. And then I was like, why are you calling this a city? It's no bigger than a village. And then there was a caretaker over there. It was really hot that day, I remember. And I went to the caretaker who was sitting under a tree, and I was like, is this it? Why are you calling it a city? It's like 5 houses. He was like, oh no, go this side. There's something more here. Did you go here? I was like, no. So I went there, and there is the so-called dockyard. Yeah, the reservoir. Yeah. And it just really takes your breath away. The first time you walk upon it, it's just like a massive giant swimming pool, like 15 feet deep, completely brick lined. Yeah. And then I was like, okay, there's clearly something more going on here. Yeah. And then I went back and started researching, and the more I researched, the more fascinated I was. Yeah. And we can talk a little bit more about that itself.